by Stephen King.
Mm.
It was so like immersive, and because when I checked it out from the library, I never thought I would finish it because it's 1,000 pages long. But then
That's a big book.
I was just in it,
Right.
and then I felt like I was hanging out with those people, and
You knew them.
yeah, and it was that sort of thing.
Mm.
We're behind the scenes now with our guest, Mark Allan Gunnells, and we're talking about the books that were transformational for us as young people. I think, too, we were talking when we were on the air about like seeing yourself in books.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading a lot of V.C. Andrews at like 11, 12, and 13. And I assure you, like Heaven and these other girls were not me. Like I was absolutely not seeing myself and who these young women were. But I think there's still like that idea of like, well, there's representation. She's a young girl and you're a young girl. So boom. Bob's your uncle, we're done here. Is there a value difference between like representation that seems authentic or genuine or matches your small town experience or a rural experience versus like, hey, that person just happens to be the same age and same sexual identity as you, therefore they must be representative?
I mean, it doesn't have to be really exact to my experience, but I just love seeing queer characters from different backgrounds, different, walks of life. Because again, when I grew up, there was nothing.
Right.
So I get excited every time I see that. And, I like seeing them in books that are vastly different from my life because it says to me, we can be in any situation. We can be in any scenario.
We live everywhere.
Yeah.
All right. We're going back on the air. We'll leave this camera up. We'll leave you guys up. Saturday morning, a St. Patrick's Day Saturday here in Columbia, South Carolina. Rex and I both dressed to head to 5 Points here and get our boozy on when it's all said and done. But for right now, we're spending time thinking about LGBTQ plus representation in literature. And we had specifically started with the horror genre, where you made a couple references to the horror genre. But this article that I found from you talks about the book banning that's happening. And now as a librarian, you're sort of on the front lines of these conversations. Can you kind of set it up for our listeners in terms of what you see happening in books, or in libraries and in public spaces related to different books?
It kind of goes across the board. Like it's not just libraries, it's, TV, it's movies. There is this push to erase us again. There is this push to not have us out there in these entertainment, like I said, books, movies, TV. And, I feel like I know why. I feel like in my lifetime, there has been a lot of progress when it comes to queer rights. And I always say, I think a lot of that came from entertainment. It came from, we finally started to be represented in books and movies and TV, and people who didn't think they knew any gay people, which, newsflash, you all do. But they started having these people in their homes.
Right.
I'm not going to say like Will and Grace is great art, but it put us in people's homes every week for years. And it started making people comfortable and seeing us as not this strange other, but just people that they may enjoy spending time with. I really think that was at the root of a lot of the progress that was made. And I think people who want to roll that progress back recognize that too, which is why they want to take us out of entertainment, out of books, out of movies, out of TV, make those harder to get to.
Well, and this is just to push back just a little bit, because I think the people that are like pushing for the not as much, right? Is there, Hollywood had a mandate that was that your film couldn't even be nominated for an Oscar unless there was representation from marginalized groups. So now you're telling this story, and it doesn't make any sense for these individuals to have these roles, right? For there to be, depending on the era that you're writing in or whatever story you're telling, I don't have a character that has that identifier, right? And yet now my film can't be nominated for an Oscar because it doesn't have that. And so there seemed like for a little bit of time there, just a short period of time, there was a push, and whether it was well-meaning or not, to make sure that everybody, and so then if you go, okay, from a demographics perspective, right? And I love that you said like everybody knows somebody that's gay. That's 100% true, but it's not 1 out of every 4 people. it's not 1 out of every 6 people. Like, what is our actual percentage here? And then is that representative of real culture and of real film? If you've got 3 people in the film, does one of them have to be gay? And that seemed to be like Hollywood's message for a while there, was like, you can't ever tell a story that doesn't include somebody that's from a marginalized group. And I think that might be where some of the pushback is coming, is people are like, but is that, are we doing this for the right reasons, or are we oversaturating for a reason that seems to be, I don't know. I guess that's the end of my monologue there. What do you think of that?
I think it only seems oversaturated because it's being compared to when we weren't there at all.
Okay, I gotcha.
Good
'cause
point.
It reminds me of when, like when Ellen had her sitcom
Mhm.
and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy started, and I think there was one other thing, 3 things, and then there was a big TV Guide cover story that said TV's gay explosion. Like it's 3 shows.
It's 3 shows.
3 shows out of
versus a
all the shows.
majillion. Yeah.
But because there used to be 0 shows, maybe it does. So that's the way I think of it. Somebody once said to me, like, you don't want them to put a gay character in something just, to be there. And I'm like, well, again, if it's not significant to the story, then why not?
Right.
Because I'm perfectly okay with, them trying to court me as a viewer or a reader, because used to, they'd never try to.
Right.
But as long as they give me something of substance in that character. But I think people, again, because they never saw us represented, it feels like they're being bombarded with it, when really I think it's much more realistic now. Because if you walk into a room with 10 people, chances are one of them is gay. You might not know it, but we really are everywhere. So
Right.
To me, everything looks more realistic. But when you're so used to that just not being there, it feels like it's more prevalent than I think it actually is.
Does it force a conversation maybe that people don't necessarily want to have? Because to your point, when people go into the room and they think like, yeah, I mean, I don't know it, so I don't care if they're gay. I don't know that they're gay. That doesn't have anything to do with me. That's their experience, not mine, right? And so do you think people are uncomfortable with a conversation that's being forced that they don't want to have?
I do think they are sometimes. I think sometimes parents don't want to explain to a child. That's why I feel like they're like, they go to their children. Like, I don't want them to have to know about, and they love to go to the more sex aspect of being gay. And I'm like, well, there's nothing about sex in this. Like, if you have a mother and a father, you don't have to talk to your kids about sex,
right,
in a story. Like, it's just, you just can tell them, like, well, sometimes 2 men can get married too. But yeah, I think it does make people uncomfortable sometimes. And yes, they might not know it if they walk in the room. But my question is, do they want to know it? Or would they rather? Because I feel like some people are much more comfortable with gay people if we stay in the closet and they don't have to
think about it.
Because, just saying, oh, yeah, I went out this weekend with my husband, well, that's telling you I'm gay. And for some people, that's shoving it in their face in a way that they say, I went out with my wife. It's not. But really, it's the same.
It's exactly the same.
It doesn't seem the same to them. But, I like, we watched a show called Downton Abbey, which is from a time period where that was not accepted
right
at all.
In Britain,
and
of all places.
They had a character who was, and it dealt with the fact of what he has to suffer. Because, a lot of people say, oh, well, I feel like they think in the past we didn't exist because we weren't visible. But we were, and that led to a whole set of problems. And I like when shows will acknowledge that. Like, we were there even then, but this is what we had to go through. It would have been weird if they had given him a more modern attitude.
Right.
But I felt like for the time period, they tried to be realistic of what his life would be like, but acknowledged, well, queer people existed then too.
And the experience is valuable, and it's worth watching, it's worth understanding, and especially the different hurdles that change over time. And I get, like, I'm with you on this in terms of, like, put it wherever, any character that it makes sense, I'm absolutely fine with that. I just have heard from, you know who the haters are. You hear from the haters that are like, it's just everywhere. It feels like every book these days has to have this. I'm like, but that's not true necessarily, as much as it is. The authors are open now to having characters that more fully represent the community that they're living in. And I think that's actually a good thing. That should be a positive thing. You want to weigh in on this?
Uh,
You're just here to listen?
Well, yeah, well, I'm fascinated by what he has to say, so.
There was a time where we really had to translate. Like, I would watch something like Rebel Without a Cause, and I would read into it this gay story going on
Really?
under the surface.
Right.
Okay.
I'm like, oh, so Sam Menio's in love with, James Dean. And,
Oh, 100%.
because, I didn't have any stories that had actual on the surface stories. So, I love that. And I read a quote by Harvey Firestein, the actor, and he had said, when he did his play Short Song Trilogy, people were like, "Oh, it's not really gay; it's universal." And he was like, "No, it's gay. I love that you can translate it to your life the way that gay people have had to translate your stories to our lives, but." I love that we're at a point, and I don't want to go backwards, where these stories are being told just blatantly and on the surface.
All right, so, what specific titles do you think are being? I mean, I am not 100% aware of this book banning thing. I know it's sort of caught on, but any specific titles do you see or problems you're having as a librarian?
I can't say anything at work, but I think generally the things I have seen. And just to give you a little bit of backstory, like I used to work at a university bookstore, and we had a little, like a pride area. I can't tell you how many times those books were hidden.
Really?
Somebody took them off the thing, and we had to search around to see where they had hidden them.
I mean, they took them.
They just didn't want them visible to people.
I mean, students did that.
Activists.
Or,
some kind of activist.
It was a public campus. Anybody could come on there.
Oh, okay.
But, I feel like there's this attitude just generally that, and especially if it is young adult fiction or children's fiction, they don't like just having a story where the main character has two fathers or two mothers. That's enough for them to want it gone.
So I think you mentioned something earlier that gets to the heart of this, because as I was looking at the banned book list, a lot of them it's about explicit sexuality in some of these books, like the Courts of Thorn and Roses books, the Sarah J. Maas books, right? Like, and at what level, at what age should young people be exposed to those kinds of relationships? But that makes the assumption that every gay character is about their sexuality. It doesn't leave room for being gay. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sexual conversation.
That's how it always used to be in the past. I think that's part of the problem. Some of the debris from the past still lingering about.
Yeah, but you'll see that especially because you'll hear the over the top statement that we're trying to have porn available for children. And what that usually means is there is a picture book where the character has two fathers. Because to them, that's about sex in a way a character having a mother and a father isn't. And that drives me crazy, because I'm like, give me some titles you're talking about. Like just having it there doesn't make it about sex.
Right.
Now, when it comes to young adult books, that sex thing is when it really starts coming in. Because they'll do that too. It doesn't have to be gay. It can be heterosexual.
Yeah.
Because teenagers never think about.
No, and they don't learn it from books. Yeah.
So
especially nowadays.
That's where the question comes in. But I feel like that gives them an excuse then to start really.
Well, it's a morality police, right? It's this idea that I don't want my child to be having these thoughts or having these conversations or witnessing these events. And because I don't want that for my kid, I'm going to keep it from happening to every kid. I'm out there protecting the masses, with my morality.
Yeah, it is a real crusade like that.
It is very much a crusade.
Society by getting rid of this one book. Yeah.
We're going to run a break. On the other side, we're going to unpack the book bans and really what we can be doing about it, if anything. We're with Mark Allan Gunnells today on Right on SC. Don't go away.
So what is the process? I mean, is it in the public libraries? Can anyone
Thank you for watching the live stream.
Well, anyone can put in
Please be a patron of the show.
I think what they call a challenge.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that the book is going to be